What's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. We're finally back in the garage. Well, I shouldn't say finally. We've been working on some customer cars, but we're finally back in here working on our Evo, and we're ready to get an engine in this thing. I did have the valve cover and the intake manifold and some other piping stuff sent off for powder coating, and it is back, so we can get this thing all assembled and dropped in the engine bay. But first thing I want to do, let me show you guys. We got the engine over here, transmission on the ground, and the transfer case on the ground. Now, this thing is pretty crusty. I can get the case a little bit more cleaned up, but the thing I'm really worried about is the seals. So these seals have been sitting for about 2 years, just chilling, kind of dry rotting out on all of our axle seals, the output out of the transfer case, and then the axles on the transmission. So I did go ahead and we got all new seals to replace those, as well as a bunch of drain plugs and crush washers, all OEM from Mitsubishi, so we shouldn't have to worry about that. So I want to get all those swapped out, obviously, before we connect everything together. And then coming over to our drive shaft on the ground, you can see she's pretty rusty, so I'm going to try to clean that up. Obviously, we don't want any rust on there when it's through the seal. We might not get a good seal if there's imperfections, so I'm gonna look up, see what the best way is to kind of sand that off. I'm thinking like really high grit sandpaper, like a 2000 grit or something like that, and then maybe just polish it up by hand. I'm not really sure. We'll figure that out. But first things first, let's get these seals pulled out. We'll get the new ones in, and we'll go from there. New seals and drain fill plugs are in on both the transfer case and the transmission. Now, while my dad was here, while I was at work, I had him go on a little mission to sand down our balancer just a little bit, just the surface rust, and then went ahead and sprayed it black. That way, we're not having rust spread through the crank. Obviously, it was a little crusty. Same thing with the motor mount, looks a whole lot better than it did. I might do the same thing for this pulley as well if I feel like it, but honestly, the only surface rust is in the grooves, and that's going to get worn off with the belt anyways, so not a huge deal there. What is a huge deal is getting the rust off of this drive shaft like I was talking about. So let's get this entire thing pulled out, and this is going to be our little test dummy because I got to do the same thing on the CV axles. Well, believe it or not, for that being my first idea, take some PB Blaster and some 1200 grit, I actually cleaned it up quite nice, and I was able to get pretty far inside because obviously it's gonna mate with the seal somewhere in here. So I just kind of rolled up the sandpaper, tucked it in there, and then cleaned it off with a rag, and I think we'll be good to go. So I might actually, before I slap the drive shaft in here, I might, kind of sand down the entire thing and just end up spraying the whole thing black. Get rid of all this rust. And the more rust we can get rid of on this car is the less that it can spread, and we can keep the car clean. So I think that's a good move. All right, here is our freshly powder coated valve cover. This is 100% aluminum. I promise. All right, yeah, this is just a plastic valve cover I had in the trailer. Obviously, I just have the garbage bag underneath it. I didn't want to put the new one on because I don't want to scratch it with the chain, but I also don't want to scratch the surface with the chain either on the top of our head. So I just slapped this guy on here, got 2 screws in here with the garbage bag to make sure we get no crap in the engine, and that should provide a nice surface that I don't care if it gets scratched when we lift this thing up. So at this point we are good to get this engine off the stand. We'll get on the ground. I got to get a rear main seal in there. As you can see, still wide open. I might actually take a little bit of that 1200 grit to the back of the crank because if you guys remember, this thing was kind of rusting out of the box. So I want to make sure that is nice and clean before we get a rear main seal on there. Last thing I want is for that rear main to start leaking as soon as we get oil in the car. That'll be a bad day. And then we can get the clutch in and ultimately get that transmission mated to the back of the engine. And since I've owned the car, I've never seen these 2 pieces connected. So we are going to finally make some forward progress. Actually, before we take that thing off the stand and have it dangling, let's go ahead and get a new throwout bearing in the transmission. That way, once it is off the stand, all we gotta do is get the rear main seal on, the clutch on, and then we can connect these 2 things together. All right, just went ahead and tore out our throwout bearing. I did go ahead and clean up our little shaft or rod, whatever you want to call this guy, with that 1200 grit and the PV blaster. Cleaned everything up, including our little springs, and I do have a new release bearing here from ACT, so this should work out well with our ACT clutch and flywheel setup. So now that everything is cleaned up, including that shaft there and our little throwout bearing surface, we'll get some grease on there and we can get our new release bearing in and get our clutch fork and everything put back in place. Well, that was a workout. Those flywheel bolts are kind of a pain in the butt because I have nothing to really lock the flywheel in place. So I kind of resort to this. Obviously, flywheel on the backside, and then on the front, I set the engine down on the floor, put my big breaker bar, hook it to our balancer, or our little crank bolt up front, and that way it just sits on the engine crane when it turns and essentially locks it in place. So these ARP bolts were kind of a pain in the butt because there's an inset on the ACT flywheel, and I couldn't really get a socket in there without it slipping off. So I ended up having to grind down an old Pittsburgh, because obviously these things are cheap, so I don't really care. But yeah, that's how I had to do it. So that's 2 sockets now we had to grind down to work on this Evo, but whatever works, I guess. We're now ready to get the clutch on, so I do have a brand new ACT. It's just a single disc clutch here. We're just gonna be using the existing pressure plate, and then I did go ahead and get the flywheel turned. So we're as clean as we can really be. Let's get this thing slapped on, and then we can connect our transmission to the engine. And just like that, we have a complete ready to drop in engine and transmission. So maybe tomorrow we'll get the car pulled in here and we can get this guy dropped in. I do want to clean up the drive shaft like I was saying, but I think I might need it down there to help hold the transfer case as I get this dropped in. So I don't know, we'll figure it out, but either way, I want to get this thing dropped in this weekend. And yeah, finally see this car with an engine in it. With that said, I'm gonna get this place cleaned up a little bit and catch you guys tomorrow. Alrighty, it is now Saturday and it's time to get this engine in the car. This morning I went ahead, cleaned up, sanded down the actual shaft part of the drive shaft and sprayed them black, as well as the motor mounts, the really rusty motor mounts, cleaned up all the rust and then sprayed those black as well. So anything you can see in the bay and even under the car is gonna be minimal rust. I know this car came from New Jersey, so it had a lot on it, but I'm doing my best to eliminate all that and hopefully eliminate the spread of it as well. But over here we have the drive shaft. Now I didn't actually do much in the actual joints of the drive shaft. Like I said, just did the shaft, but I took a wire wheel. Shout out to my dad for picking those up while he was here. But yeah, I took the wire wheel, got all the rust off, and then took some sandpaper and sanded it all down. Made sure I got as much rust as possible off. Obviously, there is still some pitting that you can kind of see under the paint, but overall, I think it looks a whole lot better. And yeah, as far as the joints go, there's no issues in there. Obviously, just a little bit of surface rust. I might sand the mounts down and do the same thing on those, but for what I needed today, this will be perfectly fine. And then same thing over here with the mounts. Got these things looking nice and fresh. No more rust on these guys. And same with this guy here. Nice finish. And obviously we masked off the threads. That way we can still get the nuts on with no problem. Last thing I want to do before we get this all assembled is clean the bolt heads off so there's no more rust on the bolt heads. And then we'll get the car pulled in here and start getting this unit into that engine bay. Also, we have to get the starter slapped on, but that's a good 20-second job. Just got the shop cleaned up over here, got the engine on the crane with our load leveler, and yeah, let's do this. Let's get the car uncovered and roll that thing in here. We'll see if we can, I don't know if I'm gonna have to put the transfer case in or not beforehand. I'm gonna have to figure that out once we get it in, see if there's enough room over the subframe to fit the the mouth on that thing. If we can put it in afterwards, that'd be cool. That means I don't have to try to balance it on the subframe while we wiggle that guy in, but if not, we'll figure it out. Did a little bit of work off camera. I did end up putting the T-case in there just because I don't think I'm gonna be able to fit that big hunk between the subframe or behind the engine. So figured it's just easier to do it this way, have it hooked up with a ratchet. Hopefully it's not too much in the way. And then I did go ahead and just kind of route some of the lines, the electrical, just so it's a little bit easier. We won't have to do it with the engine in there. But we should be good now. We got it all cleared out. Engine is right here and essentially ready to go in. So let's see if we can make this happen. Tell you, this engine went in so easy. Well, at least getting it in the engine bay was so simple. Engine is now completely in the car with the transmission. I do have the T-case already bolted up back there, as you can see. And yeah, so now, because this is all in place and I don't have to put another chain over it, we can take our plastic valve cover off and get our new seals and our legit valve cover, aluminum, back on this thing, and finally start to see how it's gonna look with the color. And then we can get the manifold on. I did do the manifold wrinkle black, so hopefully it'll look pretty good in here. I did also forget about the AC compressor, so hopefully I can still get that thing in here with the engine in. I don't think it'll be a big deal, but you never know.
It's not a game, it's a rich thing.
Well, we finally frickin' did it, and it looks so dang good. Manifold's on, valve cover's on, probably gonna have to come back off because we gotta get the turbo kit in there, and I don't wanna risk scratching the valve cover when we put that in. But I'm waiting on some bolts and some hardware for that because, yeah, we're gonna do it the right way. And he didn't have the right hardware. So I have a full setup coming for the manifold, new studs, new turbo bolts, everything, the whole 9 yards. And shout out JDC for all the titanium that's going to be covering this engine bay. We got the little spark plug cover, the dipstick with our logo on it, and then we have a whole lot more goodies for this car from them as well, as I almost just fall on all these fancy JDC bolts. But a lot of work to be done still, but this is more progress than we've ever seen on this car. Super stoked, finally got this thing in, and to be honest, it went in pretty dang simple. I thought it was going to be a lot more challenging, especially because I sprayed the engine bay and I didn't want to scratch it. But I only managed to put one little scratch in the bay, and it's hidden anyway, so not a big deal. I got to tighten up the bottom transfer case bolts and get the front motor trans mount in, and I think this is a pretty good stopping point. So yeah, I'm happy finally seeing some forward progress here, and I think this car is honestly gonna be done pretty quick. I do have a lot of work trips coming up, which, you know, puts a halt on things, but as far as the engine work, finally got this thing in, and we just gotta plumb everything up, and we might have a first start before we know it. So stay tuned. I hope you guys enjoyed this one. I know it's been a little while since I put out a video, but just slowly making progress, you know. I've been busy, and we got customer cars. I actually just finished up an Evo out here that you guys will see in the future. But yeah, this one is about ready to run as well. Just waiting on some -10 AN lines for the valve cover. So a lot going on behind the scenes. I know I don't really show a lot, but that car will be on the channel sometime in the next few months. That is a 6466 build that we did for a guy in South Dakota. So, but yeah, that's pretty much all I got for you guys in this one. Hope you guys enjoyed. I'll catch you in the next one. Until then, peace out. See y'all later.